Jake Thompson was just another guy trying to make ends meet in a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other. He worked as a mechanic at Frank's Auto Repair, a local garage that had been around for decades. Jake wasn't flashy or loud. He was the kind of person who kept his head down and did his job well. But there was something about him that set him apart from most people. It wasn't his skill with cars, though he could fix anything with an engine. It was his heart. Jake always went out of his way to help others, even when it didn't benefit him. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Jake was finishing up some paperwork inside the shop. Outside, the golden leaves were falling gently, painting the streets in warm hues of orange and yellow. As he locked up the cash register, he glanced out the window and noticed an elderly woman struggling with her bicycle near the curb. Her bike looked ancient, rusty chains, flat tires, and a wobbly frame, but she seemed determined to get it working again. The woman was Mrs. Helen Carter, a familiar face in the neighborhood. Everyone loved her because she was kind and thoughtful. She baked cookies for holidays and always remembered birthdays. Seeing her struggle tugged at Jake's heartstrings. Without hesitation, he grabbed his toolbox and headed outside. "Ma'am, do you need a hand?" Jake asked, approaching her with a friendly smile. Mrs. Carter looked up, slightly embarrassed but grateful. "Oh dear, I didn't want to bother anyone. This old thing hasn't seen much use lately, and now it seems like it doesn't want to cooperate." Jake knelt beside the bike and inspected it carefully. "Don't worry, ma'am. Let me take a look. I think I can get this sorted out for you." For the next 20 minutes, Jake tightened bolts, adjusted the brakes, and fixed the chain. He worked quickly and efficiently, chatting with Mrs. Carter as he went. She told him how she used to ride the bike every day when she was younger, visiting friends and running errands. Now she only brought it out occasionally, mostly for nostalgic reasons. When Jake finally stood up, wiping grease off his hands, the bike looked almost new. "There you go, ma'am, give it a try," he said, handing it back to her. Mrs. Carter climbed onto the seat and pedaled a few times. A wide grin spread across her face. "Oh, it feels perfect. Thank you so much, Jake. You've done such a wonderful thing for me." Jake waved off her thanks. "It's no trouble at all, just happy to help." But what neither of them realized was that someone else had been watching. Frank, the owner of the repair shop, had seen the entire exchange from the window. Instead of feeling proud of his employee's generosity, Frank grew angry. When Jake walked back inside, Frank confronted him immediately. "What do you think you're doing out there?" Frank demanded, his voice sharp. Jake blinked, caught off guard. "I was just helping Mrs. Carter with her bike." "What's wrong with that?" Frank's face turned red. "We don't do charity work here. This is a business, not a free service station. You're fired." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But it only took me a few minutes. I wasn't even on the clock." "I don't care," Frank snapped. "If you've got time to fix bikes for free, then you're not pulling your weight here. Pack your stuff and leave." Stunned and hurt, Jake gathered his belongings and left the shop in silence. He didn't argue further. He knew Frank wouldn't change his mind. As he walked home, Jake replayed the events in his head. He couldn't understand why doing something nice had cost him his job. Still, he tried to focus on the positive. At least Mrs. Carter had her bike back, and she'd been genuinely grateful. Little did Jake know, his simple act of kindness was about to set off a chain reaction that would turn his world upside down. That evening, as he sat on his porch sipping coffee, he noticed several dark SUVs drive slowly past his house. They didn't stop, but their presence lingered in his mind. Something about them felt off. For now, though, Jake pushed the thought aside, assuming it was nothing more than a coincidence. What he didn't realize was that those SUVs weren't random. And by morning, they'd return, with a purpose far bigger than anything Jake could have imagined. Jake trudged home that evening, his mind heavy with frustration and confusion. Losing his job wasn't just a blow to his pride, it was a punch to his wallet. He had bills to pay, groceries to buy, and a roof over his head that wouldn't stay there for free. The weight of it all pressed down on him as he unlocked the door to his modest little house. Dropping his toolbox by the door, he slumped onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, replaying Frank's angry words in his head. What did I do wrong? he muttered aloud, running a hand through his hair. Helping someone isn't supposed to get you fired. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across his living room, Jake tried to shake off the gloom. Maybe tomorrow would be better. Maybe he could find another job quickly. But no matter how hard he tried to focus on solutions, the sting of betrayal lingered. Helping Mrs. Carter had felt like the right thing to do, but now it seemed like the world was punishing him for it. Just as Jake started to drift into self-pity, there was a soft knock at the door. Startled, he got up and opened it to find Mrs. Carter standing there, holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Her face was warm, her eyes kind, but there was also a hint of sadness in them. "Jake," she said softly, "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." Jake blinked, surprised. "How did you—" "Oh, word gets around fast in this town," she replied with a small smile. "People care about each other here, and they know you didn't deserve to lose your job over something as simple and as good as helping me." She held out the basket. "These are for you, just a little token of my gratitude." Jake hesitated before taking the basket. Lifting the cloth, he saw an assortment of homemade pies, apple, cherry, and pecan. The smell alone made his stomach rumble. For a moment, he forgot about his troubles. "You didn't have to do this," Jake said, looking up at her. "But, thank you, really," Mrs. Carter shook her head. "It's the least I can do. You reminded me today that there are still good people in this world, people who value kindness over profit." She paused, studying him carefully. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, Jake. What you did mattered." Her words hit Jake like a wave of comfort. He nodded, feeling a bit lighter. "Thanks, Mrs. Carter, that means a lot." They stood there talking for a while longer, sharing stories about life in the town. Mrs. Carter spoke fondly of her younger days when she'd cycled everywhere, exploring every corner of the area. Jake listened intently, finding solace in her gentle voice and wise anecdotes. There was something calming about her presence, almost as if she carried a piece of history within her, a reminder of simpler times. But as their conversation continued, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every now and then he'd glance toward the street outside and catch sight of movement. At first he dismissed it as neighbors passing by or cars driving through. But then he noticed something odd. Several black SUVs cruising slowly past his house. They weren't stopping, but they weren't exactly in a hurry either. Each time one passed, Jake's unease grew. Finally, he pointed it out to Mrs. Carter. "Do you see those vehicles? They keep going back and forth, isn't that strange?" Mrs. Carter turned to look, her expression unreadable for a split second. Then she smiled faintly. "Probably just kids playing games or lost drivers. Don't worry too much about it." Something about her response struck Jake as off. She didn't seem entirely convinced herself. Still, he decided not to press the issue. After all, what could a few cars mean? This was a sleepy little town where nothing exciting ever happened. When Mrs. Carter finally left, promising to check on him again soon, Jake closed the door and leaned against it, deep in thought. The SUVs lingered in his mind, gnawing at the edges of his curiosity. He walked to the window and peeked outside, watching as yet another black vehicle drove by. It slowed momentarily near his driveway before speeding off into the night. "Okay, that's weird," Jake muttered under his breath. He debated calling the local police to report suspicious activity, but what would he even say? That some cars were driving by his house? He'd sound paranoid. Sighing, he decided to let it go, for now. Whatever was happening, he figured it couldn't be that serious. Besides, he had bigger problems to worry about, like figuring out how to pay rent next month. With that thought, Jake headed to bed, hoping sleep would clear his head. As he lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't help but wonder if the SUVs were connected to what happened earlier with Frank. Was it possible that fixing Mrs. Carter's bike had stirred up more trouble than he realized? Or was he just overthinking things? Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was restless. Little did Jake know, his questions would soon have answers that would change everything. The next morning, Jake woke up groggy and disoriented. The restless night had left him feeling like he'd barely slept at all. He shuffled to the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and stepped out onto the porch, hoping the crisp morning air would wake him up. But as soon as he opened the door, his heart skipped a beat. 7 black SUVs were parked bumper to bumper, completely blocking his driveway. Their dark windows reflected the early sunlight, giving them an ominous, impenetrable look. Jake froze, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. His mind raced with questions. What was going on? Who were these people? And why were they at his house? Before he could process anything, the doors of the SUVs swung open in unison. Men dressed in sharp suits and sunglasses emerged, moving with military precision. They walked toward him without hesitation, their expressions unreadable. Jake instinctively took a step back, gripping the railing of his porch tightly. "Jake Thompson?" one of the men asked, his voice firm but not unkind. Jake nodded slowly, his throat dry. "Yeah, that's me. What's this about?" The man flashed a badge quickly before tucking it away. "We need you to come with us. Now." Jake stared at him, dumbfounded. "Wait, hold on. Come with you where? Why? I haven't done anything wrong." "There's no time to explain here," the man said curtly. "You'll be briefed once we're en route. Please cooperate." Cooperate? En route? The words felt surreal, like something out of a movie. This wasn't how Jake's life worked. He fixed cars for a living, helped old ladies with their bikes, and paid his bills on time. None of this made any sense. But there was no room for argument. Before Jake could protest further, 2 of the men gently but firmly guided him down the steps and into one of the waiting vehicles. As he climbed inside, he glanced back toward Mrs. Carter's house. She was standing near her front gate watching the scene unfold. Her expression was calm, but her eyes betrayed a mix of concern and something else. Was it guilt? Fear? Jake couldn't tell. Once inside the SUV, Jake sat stiffly, flanked by 2 of the suited men. The interior smelled faintly of leather and polish, sterile and impersonal. No one spoke as the convoy pulled away from his house, leaving the quiet neighborhood behind. Jake watched through the tinted window as familiar streets gave way to unfamiliar roads. His mind buzzed with possibilities, each more far-fetched than the last. Was this some kind of prank? A misunderstanding, or worse, was he in trouble? After what felt like an eternity, the SUVs arrived at a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. It looked like any other industrial complex, with high fences, security cameras, and guards stationed at the gate. The convoy rolled to a stop, and Jake was escorted inside. The interior was sleek and modern, nothing like the cozy clutter of Frank's auto repair or the charm of his little neighborhood. Everything was polished steel and glass, humming with efficiency. Jake followed the men down a series of hallways until they reached a conference room. Inside, a tall man in a tailored suit stood waiting. He introduced himself as Agent Harris and gestured for Jake to sit. "Mr. Thompson?" Harris began, his tone measured. "I understand you must have a lot of questions. Let me assure you your cooperation is vital to resolving a matter of national importance." Jake blinked, struggling to keep up. "National importance? Look, I don't know what you think I've done, but I'm just a mechanic. I fix cars. That's it." Harris nodded, unfazed. "We're aware of your profession, Mr. Thompson. However, recent events suggest that your actions have inadvertently drawn attention to someone very important, a person who happens to live in your neighborhood." Jake frowned. "What are you talking about? Who?" Harris leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "Mrs. Helen Carter." Jake's stomach dropped. "Mrs. Carter? What does she have to do with this?" Harris hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed and said, "Mrs. Carter isn't just a sweet old lady who bakes cookies for the holidays. Decades ago, she was one of the top engineers working on classified military projects. Recently, intelligence suggests that foreign agents have taken an interest in her due to a groundbreaking invention she helped develop. A self-repairing drone capable of revolutionizing warfare." Jake's jaw dropped. A drone? Are you serious, Mrs. Carter? It sounds unbelievable, I know, Harris admitted. But her work has always been shrouded in secrecy. When you repaired her bicycle yesterday, it triggered surveillance protocols, tied to her location. Those agents you saw driving past your house last night, they weren't random. They were monitoring her movements. Your kindness, while commendable, drew unwanted attention. Jake slumped back in his chair, overwhelmed. All this because he fixed a bike? It seemed absurd, almost laughable, if it weren't so terrifying. So, what happens now? Jake asked finally. Am I in trouble? No, Mr. Thompson, Harris replied. Quite the opposite. We believe your skills could prove invaluable in ensuring Mrs. Carter's safety, but first we need your full cooperation. Jake sat silently for a moment, processing everything. On one hand, this whole situation was insane. On the other, he couldn't ignore the fact that Mrs. Carter, the same woman who brought him pies and shared stories of her youth, was in danger. If there was even a chance he could help, he knew he had to try. All right, Jake said finally, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. Tell me what I need to do. Harris smiled faintly, clearly relieved. Good choice, Mr. Thompson. Follow me. We'll explain everything. As Jake rose from his seat, he couldn't shake the surreal feeling that his life had turned into something out of a spy thriller. But deep down, he also felt a flicker of determination. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. For Mrs. Carter, for his town, and maybe even for himself. Jake followed Agent Harris down another long hallway, his mind still reeling from everything he'd just learned. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold glow on the polished floors. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the situation was pressing down on him. He couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Carter, the sweet old woman who baked pies and told stories about her youth. How could she possibly be connected to something so big? And how had fixing her bike put them both in danger? As they entered, a secure room filled with monitors and high-tech equipment, Jake noticed Mrs. Carter sitting at a table in the corner. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, but there was still a quiet strength in her eyes. When she saw Jake, she stood up and walked over, her hands clasped tightly together. Jake, she said softly, her voice tinged with guilt. I'm so sorry you're caught up in this. Jake shook his head quickly. Don't apologize, ma'am. I don't know what's going on, but if I can help, I will. Mrs. Carter gave him a grateful smile before turning to Agent Harris. He doesn't need to be involved in this. Let me handle it. Harris raised an eyebrow. With all due respect, Mrs. Carter, your safety is our top priority. And right now, Mr. Thompson's actions have made him part of this equation. We can't afford to leave anything to chance. Jake glanced between them, trying to piece things together. What exactly are we dealing with here? Agent Harris gestured for everyone to sit down. On one of the large screens, a map appeared, dotted with red markers. Foreign operatives have been tracking your movements, Mrs. Carter. They believe you still possess critical information about the drone project you worked on years ago. While we've managed to intercept some of their communications, they remain a significant threat. Jake frowned. But why would they care about something that happened decades ago? Wouldn't the technology be outdated by now? Mrs. Carter sighed, leaning forward slightly. Not entirely. The principles behind the self-repairing mechanism are timeless. If someone were able to reverse engineer it, they could apply it to modern systems, military drones, satellites, even autonomous vehicles. It's not just about the invention itself, it's about the potential applications. Jake nodded slowly, beginning to understand. So when I fixed your bike, it triggered surveillance protocols linked to my location, Mrs. Carter finished. The bike had a small GPS tracker embedded in it, a precaution I thought was long abandoned. Apparently it wasn't. Jake ran a hand through his hair, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. This is insane. I was just trying to help. And you did, Mrs. Carter said firmly. You reminded me that kindness still exists in the world. That's worth more than you realize. Agent Harris cleared his throat, bringing the conversation back to the task at hand. We need to neutralize the threat before it escalates. Our plan involves creating decoy devices that mimic components of the drone. These decoys will mislead the operatives, allowing us to track their movements and apprehend them. Jake blinked. Decoy devices? You want me to build those? Harris nodded. Your mechanical expertise makes you uniquely qualified for this task. With Mrs. Carter's knowledge of the original design, the two of you can work together to create convincing replicas. For a moment, Jake hesitated. This wasn't fixing cars or bicycles. It was building fake pieces of cutting-edge technology to outsmart spies. What if he messed up? What if he made things worse? Sensing his hesitation, Mrs. Carter placed a reassuring hand on his arm. You're smarter than you give yourself credit for, Jake. I've seen the way you work. You have a gift for understanding how things fit together. Trust me, we can do this. Her confidence gave Jake a boost. He took a deep breath and nodded. All right, let's do it. Over the next several hours, Jake and Mrs. Carter got to work. The facility provided them with state-of-the-art tools and materials, far beyond anything Jake had ever used at Frank's Auto Repair. At first, he felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the task. But Mrs. Carter guided him patiently, explaining the intricacies of the drone's design in simple terms. Together, they brainstormed ideas, sketched diagrams, and tested prototypes. As they worked side by side, Jake began to see a different side of Mrs. Carter. Beneath her gentle exterior was a brilliant mind, sharp and analytical. She spoke passionately about her time working on the project, sharing stories of late nights in the lab and breakthrough moments that changed the course of engineering. Jake listened intently, amazed by her resilience and dedication. You must have faced a lot of challenges back then, Jake said during a brief break, being one of the few women in such a male-dominated field. Mrs. Carter smiled wistfully. It wasn't easy, but I didn't let it stop me. Sometimes you just have to prove people wrong, one success at a time. Her words struck a chord with Jake. He thought about how Frank had dismissed him, how losing his job had shaken his confidence. But here he was, proving himself capable of handling something far bigger than he'd ever imagined. By the end of the day, they had completed the first set of decoy devices. Each one looked convincingly real, designed to fool even the most sophisticated scanners. Agent Harris reviewed their work and gave them an approving nod. This is excellent, he said. Now comes the hard part, deploying them without tipping off the operatives. Jake exchanged a glance with Mrs. Carter. They both knew the stakes were higher than ever. But instead of fear, Jake felt a strange sense of determination. For the first time in days, he felt like he had purpose. We'll figure it out, Jake said confidently. Together. Mrs. Carter smiled, her eyes shining with pride. That's the spirit. As they prepared for the next phase of the operation, Jake realized something important. This wasn't just about saving Mrs. Carter or stopping foreign agents. It was about proving that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges. And maybe, just maybe, it was about finding redemption for himself and for the kindness that had started it all. The decoy devices were ready, but now came the hardest part, getting them into the hands of the foreign operatives without raising suspicion. Jake and Mrs. Carter sat in the secure room with Agent Harris, poring over maps and plans. The tension in the air was thick like a storm about to break. Everyone knew that one wrong move could put them all in danger. We need to make this look believable, Agent Harris said, tapping a marker against the map on the table. If they suspect anything, it's over. Jake leaned forward, studying the layout. What if we plant the decoys somewhere they're likely to search, somewhere connected to Mrs. Carter? Mrs. Carter nodded thoughtfully. My shed. It's old, rarely used, and close enough to my house that it makes sense for me to store things there. Agent Harris raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? If they find it too easily, they might get suspicious. It's perfect, Mrs. Carter insisted. They'll think I'm careless, not clever. Trust me, I've dealt with people underestimating me before. Jake couldn't help but smile. There was a fire in her voice, a quiet determination that reminded him why he admired her so much. All right, he said, turning to Harris. Let's do it. The team sprang into action. Under the cover of darkness, Jake and Mrs. Carter drove to her property in one of the facility's unmarked vans. The night was cool and eerily silent, broken only by the sound of crickets chirping in the distance. As they approached the shed, Jake felt his pulse quicken. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting someone to jump out of the bushes. "You okay?" Mrs. Carter asked, noticing his unease. "Yeah," Jake replied, forcing a grin. "Just, keeping an eye out for ninjas or something." Mrs. Carter chuckled softly. "Don't worry. If anyone shows up, I'll protect you." Despite the gravity of the situation, Jake laughed. Her calm demeanor was contagious, helping him push aside his nerves. Together they carried the decoy devices inside the shed and strategically placed them among old tools and boxes. To anyone who stumbled upon them, the gadgets would blend in perfectly, just another forgotten piece of equipment. As they finished up, Jake stepped back to survey their work. "Looks good. Let's hope they take the bait." Mrs. Carter patted him on the shoulder. "They will. Now let's get out of here." Back at the facility, the waiting game began. Jake hated this part, the uncertainty, the endless hours of staring at screens and listening to static-filled radio chatter. He tried to distract himself by tinkering with some spare parts in the workshop, but his mind kept drifting back to the shed. What if the operatives didn't fall for it? What if they figured out the truth? Mrs. Carter stayed by his side most of the time, offering words of encouragement whenever she saw him pacing nervously. "Patience is key," she told him one evening, as they shared a cup of tea in the break room. "Sometimes the hardest thing to do is wait. But trust the plan, and trust yourself." Her faith in him meant more than she probably realized. Jake had spent years doubting his own abilities, letting setbacks define him. But working alongside Mrs. Carter had shown him that he was capable of far more than he'd ever imagined. Fixing cars and bikes was one thing, but creating decoy devices and outsmarting spies, that was a whole new level of accomplishment. Finally, after 2 long days, the surveillance team picked up movement near Mrs. Carter's property. A black van parked outside her house, and several figures emerged, heading straight for the shed. Jake watched the live feed on a monitor, his heart pounding in his chest. "They're taking the bait," Agent Harris announced, his voice low but triumphant. "Now we move." The operation unfolded like clockwork. Law enforcement agents surrounded the area, staying hidden until the operatives retrieved the decoy devices. Once they were back in their van and driving away, the trap was sprung. Sirens blared, lights flashed, and within minutes the operatives were arrested without incident. Jake exhaled deeply, sinking into a chair as the reality of what they'd accomplished sank in. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd stopped the threat and kept Mrs. Carter safe. Agent Harris shook Jake's hand firmly. "You did good, Mr. Thompson. Better than good. You played a crucial role in this mission." Jake shrugged modestly. "I just did what anyone else would have done. Besides, I couldn't have pulled it off without Mrs. Carter." Mrs. Carter smiled warmly, placing a hand on his arm. "And I couldn't have done it without you, Jake. You prove that kindness and courage go hand in hand." In the days that followed, news of the thwarted espionage attempt spread quickly through the town. At first, no one knew exactly what had happened, only that Jake and Mrs. Carter were somehow involved. Rumors flew, but the truth remained classified. Still, Jake noticed a shift in how people treated him. Neighbors who barely acknowledged him before now greeted him with smiles and nods of respect. Even Frank, the man who had fired him, showed up at his doorstep looking sheepish. "I heard about everything," Frank said, twisting his cap in his hands. "I was wrong to let you go, Jake. I acted out of anger and I regret it. Your job's still here if you want it." Jake hesitated, considering the offer. But then he remembered the sense of purpose he'd found during the mission, the satisfaction of using his skills to make a real difference. "Thanks, Frank, but I think I'm gonna pass. I've got other plans." Frank looked surprised, but nodded. "Well, if you change your mind, the door's always open." With the help of a government grant awarded for his bravery, Jake decided to open his own repair shop. He named it Carter and Thompson Repairs, honoring the partnership that had saved the day. Business boomed almost immediately thanks to the buzz around Jake's heroics. People came from miles away to meet the mechanic turned spy, eager to hear his story, or at least get their car fixed by someone who'd helped save the nation. Mrs. Carter became a regular visitor, stopping by the shop to chat and share cookies. Their bond had grown stronger through the ordeal, transforming from neighborly acquaintance to genuine friendship. She often joked that Jake owed her a lifetime supply of pies for dragging him into the mess, but he knew she didn't mean it. Deep down, he suspected she was proud of him, and that meant the world. One afternoon, as Jake wiped grease off his hands and surveyed the bustling shop, he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Life had thrown him curveballs, but he'd risen to the challenge. He'd proven to himself and to everyone else that even the smallest acts of kindness could lead to extraordinary outcomes. And sometimes, the most unlikely heroes rose to the occasion. For Jake Thompson, the future looked brighter than ever. Jake's new repair shop quickly became the heart of the town. People didn't just come for his mechanical skills, they came for the stories. Word had spread about how he'd helped stop a group of foreign operatives, and while the details were hazy, thanks to the classified nature of the operation, everyone knew one thing for sure: Jake Thompson was a hero. And not the flashy kind with capes and gadgets, but the quiet, down-to-earth type who did what was right, even when it wasn't easy. The shop itself was cozy and inviting, painted in warm tones with shelves lined with tools and spare parts. A small counter displayed photos from the grand opening, including one of Jake standing next to Mrs. Carter, both beaming proudly. Above the cash register hung a sign that read, "Fixing more than just cars." It was Jake's way of reminding himself and others that kindness and integrity mattered just as much as technical skill. Mrs. Carter visited often, always bringing fresh pies or cookies. She loved sitting in the corner of the shop, watching Jake work while chatting with customers. Her presence added a touch of charm to the place, and soon enough, people started referring to her as the shop's honorary grandmother. Kids would run up to her during weekend visits, asking for stories about her adventures as an engineer. At first, she kept things vague. After all, most of her work was still top secret. But over time, she began sharing tales of late-night experiments, groundbreaking discoveries, and the occasional mishap that left her covered in grease or sparks. One day, as Jake tightened the bolts on a customer's car, Mrs. Carter leaned against the counter sipping tea. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I never imagined my quiet little life would end up like this." Jake glanced at her, smirking. "Like what? Saving the world?" She chuckled softly. "Well, yes, but also finding someone like you. Someone who reminds me that the world isn't as hopeless as it sometimes seems." Jake wiped his hands on a rag and joined her at the counter. "I should be thanking you. You gave me a chance to prove myself, to show that I'm more than just a mechanic who got fired for doing the right thing." Mrs. Carter shook her head firmly. "No, Jake. You proved that all on your own. All I did was trust you. The rest was up to you." Their conversation was interrupted by the bell above the door jingling. A young man walked in looking nervous. He held a toolbox in one hand and a wrinkled flyer in the other. Hi," he stammered. "I saw the sign outside. It says you're hiring an apprentice?" Jake smiled warmly. "Yeah, we are. Come on in. Let's talk." As Jake interviewed the young man, Mrs. Carter watched quietly, a knowing smile playing on her lips. This was exactly what she'd hoped for, a cycle of kindness continuing. Jake had once been given a chance to shine, and now he was passing that opportunity along to someone else. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm for Jake and Mrs. Carter. The town buzzed with renewed energy, thanks in part to the legend of their unlikely adventure. Parents told their kids bedtime stories about the mechanic and the old lady who outsmarted spies. Local newspapers wrote glowing articles about community spirit and resilience. Even Frank, who occasionally stopped by the shop to grab coffee, admitted that Jake leaving his garage had been the best thing to happen to him. It forced him to rethink how he treated employees and customers alike. But beyond the fame and recognition, something deeper had changed within Jake. He no longer doubted his worth or second-guessed his decisions. Helping Mrs. Carter and ultimately protecting her had taught him that every action, no matter how small, could ripple outward and create waves of impact. Whether it was fixing a bike, building decoy devices, or mentoring a nervous apprentice, Jake understood that he had the power to make a difference. One crisp autumn morning, months after the incident, Jake arrived at the shop to find Mrs. Carter waiting outside. She held a small wooden box in her hands, its surface polished to a soft sheen. "What's this?" Jake asked curiously. Mrs. Carter handed it to him. "Open it." Inside was a miniature model of the self-repairing drone, a perfect replica of the invention she'd worked on decades ago. Each detail was meticulously crafted, from the sleek wings to the tiny gears inside. Jake stared at it in awe. "I made it for you," Mrs. Carter explained. "A reminder of everything we went through together, and maybe inspiration for whatever comes next." Jake felt a lump rise in his throat. "This is incredible. Thank you." She patted his arm affectionately. "Keep it safe, Jake. Who knows? Maybe someday you'll invent something just as groundbreaking." Jake laughed, though the idea wasn't entirely far-fetched anymore. After everything he'd been through, he realized that limits were often just illusions. If a simple mechanic could help thwart a national security threat, then anything was possible. As the seasons changed, so did the town. Jake's shop thrived, becoming a hub for laughter, learning, and connection. His apprentice turned out to be a quick learner, eager to soak up knowledge and lend a hand wherever needed. Together, they fixed cars, built custom parts, and even hosted workshops for local kids interested in mechanics. Mrs. Carter remained a constant presence, her wisdom and warmth lighting up every corner of the shop. On weekends, the three of them, Jake, Mrs. Carter, and the apprentice, would sit on the porch behind the shop, drinking lemonade and talking about dreams. Jake dreamed of expanding the business, maybe even opening a second location in a nearby town. Mrs. Carter dreamed of writing a memoir, not about her espionage days, but about the lessons she'd learned throughout her life. The apprentice dreamed of designing eco-friendly vehicles that could change the future. "Dreams are funny things," Mrs. Carter mused one afternoon, gazing at the horizon. "They start small, like seeds, but if you nurture them, they grow into something beautiful." Jake nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. He thought about how far he'd come since that fateful day when he fixed Mrs. Carter's bike. Back then, he'd been struggling just to keep his head above water. Now he was thriving, not because of luck, but because he chose to act with kindness, courage, and determination. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the yard. Life wasn't perfect and challenges still lay ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Jake felt ready to face them. With friends like Mrs. Carter by his side and a community that believed in him, he knew he could handle anything. And so, as the leaves rustled gently in the breeze, Jake raised his glass of lemonade in a silent toast to friendship, to bravery, and to the endless possibilities of tomorrow.